In 1975, the United States was the most powerful nation on Earth. It had 2 million active duty soldiers, 12 large aircraft carriers capable of projecting power anywhere on the planet, B-52 bombers, F-14 Tomcat fighters that could level cities and burn down jungles, plus over 20,000 nuclear warheads. Supported by missile submarines and strategic bombers, America possessed a complete nuclear triad capable of destroying the Earth multiple times over. Its opponent, Vietnam, had a per capita GDP only 1/20th that of the United States, poorer than some African countries. Vietnamese soldiers fought barefoot or in straw sandals, armed mostly with outdated World War II equipment. They relied entirely on aid from China and the Soviet Union. They had no missiles, no air superiority, almost no air force, let alone aircraft carriers or strategic bombers. Yet, despite this overwhelming disparity, America lost. The world's strongest superpower was beaten and humiliated by a ragtag army of peasant soldiers in straw sandals. The US eventually withdrew from Vietnam in haste and disgrace. So, what was the real reason Vietnam could not be defeated?
To understand what the Vietnam War was really about, we need to briefly review its background. Vietnam had been an independent nation for thousands of years, though nominally a tributary of Chinese dynasties. In 1884, after China lost the Sino-French War, it was forced to recognize Vietnam as a French colony. Vietnam then became part of French Indochina, which included present-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. During the long period of colonial rule, Germany defeated France in World War II, causing chaos in the colonies. Japan took advantage and occupied all of Indochina. Their brutal management made the French colonial period seem tolerable by comparison. This led to a devastating famine in 1945 that killed over 1 million people, causing deep hatred among the Vietnamese. Many rose up to resist. Among them was a handsome young man with a goatee, Ho Chi Minh. He had lived in France and the Soviet Union and was a committed communist. Upon returning home,
Ho Chi Minh was furious, but had limited options. North Vietnam was industrially backward and poor after years of war. While the South enjoyed American dollars, Ho had to ask his big brothers for help. The Soviets were busy with the Cold War, and China had just finished the Korean War and was dealing with internal struggles, so Ho was told to be patient. Meanwhile, Ngo Dinh Diem continued his disastrous rule in the South. Although 70% of South Vietnamese were Buddhist, he favored Catholics, granting them tax breaks and privileges while persecuting Buddhists. In 1960, Ho Chi Minh decided to escalate and established the National Liberation Front, known as the Viet Cong, in the South. Using the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia, they sent men and weapons south to conduct assassinations, bombings, and guerrilla warfare. In 1963, Buddhist protests against government oppression led to police firing on demonstrators. A monk self-immolated in Saigon, and the shocking photo made global headlines. The US realized that continuing to support Diem would hand victory to the communists. They allowed a military coup. Diem was overthrown and killed, but South Vietnam's politics became even more chaotic as generals fought for power. The Viet Cong grew stronger. The US concluded that without direct intervention, South Vietnam would collapse. In August 1964, using the Gulf of Tonkin incident as a pretext, the US Congress passed a resolution authorizing full-scale war. From 1965 to 1975, the Vietnam War unfolded as a decade-long tragedy. At its peak, over 500,000 US troops were in Vietnam, supported by B-52 bombers, helicopters, and chemical weapons. The strategy was carpet bombing, search and destroy missions, and heavy bombing of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Despite dropping millions of tons of bombs and using Agent Orange,
Why did America lose?
The core issue was that the U.S. intervention in Vietnam lacked legitimacy. America went to war to contain communism and protect a free South Vietnam. However, the South Vietnamese government was corrupt, dictatorial, and deeply unpopular. The U.S. appeared more like an invader than a liberator. American soldiers had low morale and struggled to understand why they were fighting. Many did not know who they were fighting for. Upon returning home, they were often called baby killers and spat on at airports. The North Vietnamese, on the other hand, were fighting a war of national liberation. They received support from the Soviet Union and China. America was essentially fighting the entire communist bloc alone. Militarily, although the U.S. had superior firepower, the Viet Cong avoided direct confrontations. They used guerrilla tactics, hiding in jungles and underground tunnels. They blended in with civilians, farmers by day, fighters by night. The U.S. could not distinguish between civilians and combatants, which led to atrocities that further alienated the local population. The corrupt South Vietnamese government pushed neutral peasants into the arms of the Viet Cong by failing to carry out land reform. The Viet Cong, by contrast, distributed land to farmers, winning their support. Hatred became the strongest motivator. The war was also brought directly into American living rooms through graphic television coverage. Coffins draped with flags returning home shattered public support. People began questioning why their children were dying in a meaningless war. Muhammad Ali famously refused the draft, saying, "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." The draft tore American society apart. Fragging, soldiers attacking their own officers, became common. The nation was in turmoil. In 1975, North Vietnamese T-54 tanks, classic Soviet-made vehicles, rolled into Saigon. These durable tanks, produced in massive numbers, have appeared in conflicts from the Vietnam War to modern times.